Well, today marks the official start of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. It's the first time an American president has convened Africa's leaders in a single conference. Nearly 50 African heads of state and government are gathered for this unprecedented meeting in Washington, D.C. Many analysts are saying the summit offers the United States a chance to strengthen ties with a very dynamic part of the world, which is an increasing contributor to global prosperity. Arise News Washington Bureau Chief James Blue joins us from the nation's capital with more on the summit. And James, I tell you, I was down there with you yesterday, and this is really, really a big deal. And I've got to ask, what do you think will be some of the major accomplishments, or at least will be on the agenda for the 3 days of this summit?
Well, Julian, I think one of the things is it is placing Africa in the center. 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are on the African continent. And the hope is that Africa will sort of emerge not as a place of need, but as a place of opportunity. With the sort of sluggish economy, we are sort of just stabilizing in the United States. The hope is that by focusing on Africa and going to Africa, that there might be an opportunity to really engage, create some links, and just sort of help the connection be made. There's a whole phrase that the Africans are using, Africa Rising, and you certainly can see it given the spirit and the real expectation that people had, as you witnessed last night.
Absolutely. And of course, last night was a nice meeting with the Nigerian president, Goodluck Jonathan, and a lot of initiatives there and networking exchange at that meeting and at that dinner. I just want to talk, though, about the fact that we seem to be, and I say we, the United States seems to be late to this game here. Of course, China has been involved, and other countries have been involved in Africa for quite some time now. Why are we so late to the game here?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons. Firstly, the United States has had traditional trade partners in Europe, in Asia, in Latin America that have been wonderful and have worked well for years. But now the growing economies, the rising middle class is in Africa. And so, yes, China has had a summit. The EU has had a summit, France, Brazil, India has had an India-African summit. They've all had summits, but what is special, the U.S. is still the largest world economy. The U.S. is still the one that when Africans are asked, where do you want to do business, the U.S. is the place. So despite being late, I think the U.S. still has an opportunity. That's certainly what the Obama administration is saying. But in addition, one of the issues, because the sort of countries in Africa are so diverse, they have very different styles of leadership. They're not all democracies.
Right.
The U.S. will not do business in some places, whereas countries like China are happy to go and do business in countries that are dictatorships, countries where people are oppressed and where there are no human rights or freedoms. And that difference has sort of slowed the U.S. ability to embrace Africa the way it is doing this week. But now that there is this focus, I think you're really going to see some gains.
Absolutely, James. We're talking about emerging democracies throughout that continent. That's something that President Obama has talked about. But this goes back past the Obama administration. This goes back to many things that the Bush administration has done. But I want to focus on something that you said there in terms of what China is doing. It's the #1 trading partner with the continent of Africa with about $109.1 billion. But there's a fine line, I think, between exploitation and cooperation for a mutual benefit between trading partners and countries, isn't there?
There is. And, China is in a very different place. The Chinese economy is in a different place than the American economy. China still needs a lot of raw materials. Africa is resource rich. And all the materials, from the minerals to the wood to all the things that you can extract and take to China, that is a very good relationship. The U.S. economy is much less based on extractive products. We're already fully developed. We have, our cities are in many places compact and ready to go. And so we don't need those raw materials in the way that China has needed them. And so we have had to have a different relationship with Africa. And I think, that sort of evolving Places like Kenya, where you have a very big IT sector, places like South Africa, where you have a very solid banking system. Sure, there's oil in Nigeria, but we know that the agriculture economy in Nigeria is growing. So what China and U.S. have different needs about what they want from Africa, and that has shaped the policies of both countries.
Absolutely. There's a lot of things going on. We're talking about governance, security, but also health issues. Real quickly, because we don't have much time left, if you could talk about Ebola and that whole scare, the crisis there. Obviously, this is going to be front and center on the agenda over the next 3 days as well, I'm sure.
It is front and center, and Ebola has already caused 2 casualties at the summit. The presidents of Liberia and Sierra Leone decided not to travel so they could take care of their own countries in this crisis. Clearly, the U.S. is worried about Ebola. There's a suspected case here on U.S. grounds. You guys are going to cover it later. And what has happened is trying to make sure that the links are there, that the partnership is there, so that the U.S. and all the agencies, USAID, Health and Human Services, can support the African countries that are going and have to deal with Ebola. The reality is, and and I'm just going to finish, if Ebola makes it to a large African city where there's lots of plane transport to the west, Ebola will make it to the U.S. as it may have already.
James, before you go, I just want to throw this in here, and I think this is really important. Of course, government's involvement with the continent of Africa is very well known. Of course, President Obama going to Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, that was a huge deal, making almost a state of the continent address down there in South Africa, and also visiting Tanzania, talking about electricity. How much do you think Americans, the average American, really cares about what goes on in Africa, and how much should they be concerned about this?
I think that's a great question, and clearly part of the summit is to try to raise the profile of Africa in the United States, and what is really true is that given the growth that Africa is experiencing, there's going to be demand for U.S. products. There's going to, everyone would prefer to have Converse instead of Tata tennis shoes. Converse shoes are made here in the U.S. Tata is an Indian brand. So as Africans get richer, they want our products, and that makes things work better for the U.S. economy. That's why people should be cared.
James Boo, Arise News, Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief. James, thank you for that insightful report, sir.
Thank you.